We are so glad to have everyone join us for this LRC Live Let's Talk About Women. We have some fabulous women in the room with us today in our virtual room, and we're excited to kind of be able to dig in on having a conversation about what it's like to be a woman, the messages that we've internalized, and our hopes moving forward. So I will do some quick introductions, and then we'll move right into the conversation agreements. Before I start, I just want to give a little bit of background on Living Room Conversations and what it is that we do. We, at our core, what we're hoping to accomplish is to be able to respect, relate, and connect through conversation. And so this is one way that we're doing this, is by sharing this live stream with others so that you can follow along and see what it's like to engage in a conversation. And our hopes are that it inspires you to have your own conversations. There is a PDF that will have 10 questions all about women, some of which we're pulling for our conversation today, that you'll be able to download is the word we're looking for on the website. So I will go ahead and make some introductions. We have Tanae Atagi Henry, and she is the leader of a nonprofit called Imagining Tomorrow. And she does a Provo Girls Summit, which is a really cool thing where they interview girls ages 8 to 12, get to interview female professionals. She was part of a discussion group that I had along with Julianne, Olivia, and Kirsten, where we talked about anti-Blackness and where that shows up in our faith community. Julianne Rensink is a fantastic cellist. She teaches music at an elementary school, and I've been in a book club. You're going to notice that I reference book clubs a lot. I've been in a lot of them. So Julianne was in one of those, plus the discussion group. And then Olivia Knudsen is a graphic designer, and she was in the discussion group plus a different book club called One Heart, which was really interesting because we kind of dived into immigrant and refugee narratives and stories, and then we combined our book club discussion with a service project, which was really cool. And it was organized by her sister-in-law, who's also a fantastic human being. Kirsten Nielsen and Amber were both in a social justice book club that I had in my old neighborhood. And then Kirsten worked with me on a project where we tried to harness the power of community to address domestic violence in our area. And she was pivotal in getting that off the ground and supporting that work. So she has a lot to say and contribute around political issues, particularly. And then Amber Smith Johnson is a professor of English, and she has been in the book club and the discussion group and all the things, and is a tremendous athlete to boot. So I love all these women, and I'm excited for everyone to be able to learn from each other in this group, and because we haven't had a conversation like this before. So I'm excited to see what surfaces. Like any living room conversation, we are going to start by digging into, I use the term digging into more than I probably should. We will read the conversation agreements together. So we'll each take a turn reading one of these agreements. The point of them is to create a really nice and safe container so that we feel like we're able to bring our authentic selves and share personal stories and experiences. So as we read them, kind of be thinking about which ones come naturally to you, which ones are a little bit more challenging, and if there's a concept or an idea that you want to take and try to practice during our conversation today. So we are going to start with Tanae, and we'll go Tanae, Julianne, Olivia, Kirsten, Amber, and then I'll read the last one.
Listen and be curious. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Show respect and suspend judgment. People tend to judge one another. Setting judgment aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Look for common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise, and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Be authentic and welcome that from others. Share what's important to you. Speak from your experience. Be considerate of others who are doing the same.
Be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you're answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
And finally, own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal, like the timeout sign, if you feel the agreements are not being honored. I just want us to sit with those for a little bit and think about the potential and the possibility if we could be having more conversations where we were looking for common ground and appreciating differences, where we felt like we could be authentic and we welcomed that from other people, where we knew people were going to do their best to suspend judgment and show respect, and where we approached each other with a little more curiosity. That's the goal. And for tonight in this conversation, and hopefully, I think that you'll notice as you start really trying to pay attention to the way that you communicate with others and these agreements, you start to kind of embody them. And so it carries on into your personal life as well, which can be really powerful. I think that this past year has given us a lot to talk about, and we could all use a little more curiosity and respect and suspension of judgment in our interactions with each other. So tonight we will be talking about women. And I think that a lot of different feelings and perspectives come up when you consider what it means to be a woman and your experience being a woman. For those of you that have daughters, your experience raising women, it all gives us kind of a different angle and an idea around what it means to be a woman. So our first question for tonight is going to be, what roles, we get to choose between two questions. So either, what roles have you learned about gender from parents, school, peers, media, faith? Which do you hold true and which do you break? Or, how have you seen society treat boys and men differently from girls and women? What impact has that had on you personally? So you'll each have up to 2 minutes to answer the question. If you see me looking down, I'm not really texting, I'm just timing you on my cell phone. So I will have a little timer here. And if you get to your 2 minutes, I'll give you a little wrap it up signal just to let you finish that thought and then pass the time on to someone else. So I will start. Well, I should probably start. That's fair. So I will start myself. And I am going to answer the question.
Leaving us in suspense.
I can't hear you.
Now you're muted.
But maybe like fake muted.
Yeah.
Like, is it a?
Yeah, because your mute sign's not on. The virtual space, I love it so much.
Like the connection doesn't seem bad. Like it's not glitchy. The audio.
She
or
froze for 1
Can
second.
you hear me now?
Oh yeah.
I don't know what happened. Okay. It's the patriarchy. No. Okay. So I think that growing up, what I thought about being a woman, I think I took a lot from the women in my life. And so my mom was fantastic. My grandmother was fantastic. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so that was definitely like the future I envisioned for myself. I had a lot of female teachers, so I think that I also thought about myself in teaching context as well. Like, oh, I'm going to be the fun English teacher or the fun Spanish teacher. I'm going to be a mom. This is how my life is going to play out. And I think that in my faith community, it reinforced that idea of nurturer and supporter and giver. And I think that as I've come into myself as an adult. Some of those I do hold on to. I do enjoy nurturing and being a mother and teaching. Those are things that I just love anyway. But I've also realized the power that I can embody as a leader and an organizer and a convener, things that maybe I had, without a lot of representation, had considered more masculine traits or roles, or a more masculine space. So I don't know if I break them. I do cry a lot, which I feel like is a female stereotype. I also have, I don't know. Anyway, I feel like I'm about to the point where I'm going to start rambling. So I'm going to stop and pass the torch on. I'm going to start with Amber this time. And we're going to go Amber, Kirsten, Olivia, Julianne, Tanae.
Yeah, for me, kind of addressing that question of how society perhaps treats girls differently from boys or men and women or whatever. And just as you were talking, a story came to my mind. I remembered when I was in graduate school, which also, just given my background and my upbringing, was a little bit of a taboo. Women weren't necessarily, like the women in my family, the women in my community, weren't necessarily excited that I was taking on more school and with the intent to work. So that was something, again, that just wasn't really modeled for me. But even when we got into graduate school, I remember a lot of the men in the program would complain about the workload and complain about, how hard it was. And it was, graduate school is hard. But then the women in the graduate program would get together and be like, yeah, but you have a wife at home. And there was somehow still this expectation that even though I was in the middle of a master's program, I was also supposed to be simultaneously the domestic goddess and also like the angel at the hearth, and all those other, things, the main nurturer, the primary cleaner, cooker, whatever. I even have this picture of me the day of my thesis defense, and I've got oven mitts on and I'm pulling dinner out of the oven and I'm wearing my suit and my whole and it's on me as well. I felt like I had to embody all of those roles simultaneously. And I didn't ask maybe necessarily for the help from my partner that I should have. This is my job. And if I've made the choice to abandon my family and go to school, or abandon my family and go to work, then I have to make up for it in, all the ways, because it's just not fair for me to put my bad choice onto my partner. So anyway, it was just really interesting too, at graduate school, the differences in the genders from my perspective.
So thinking about the first question, how have I learned about gender roles? One of the strongest influences in my life growing up was my grandmother, my dad's mom. And she was an incredible woman. She was an immigrant. Well, her parents were immigrants. She was first generation born in America. She was a single mom with 3 boys. She took over her parents' business and ran it, and employed multiple people in her families as well as other people in the community. And we had a very close relationship. And she was always very adamant about me going to college and very focused on my education, more so than my parents in a lot of ways. That's what she would always talk about when I'd meet her friends. That's what she'd brag about, were my grades or what I was doing with regards to my schooling. But at the same time, when we would go over to her house for dinner, she would excuse my brothers and my dad after the meal, and my mom and I were expected to go in the kitchen and clean up by ourselves. And it's like this weird tension that has always been, where school was always yes, you will do school, but at the same time, the idea, the expectation was that I would be a mom and I would stay home. And I remember hearing my mom and her friends talk about literally the one woman in my neighborhood growing up who was not a stay-at-home mom, and how, well, she doesn't have to work, but she wants to, and how that was very much looked down on. And that's something that I just kind of took on myself without realizing. My husband is a self-proclaimed feminist and is fantastic and very progressive. But when we were getting married and I was applying for grad schools and he had several years left at the university where we met, it never occurred to either of us that he could work and I could do my schooling. It was his schooling is what came first. And it's not, like Amber was saying, that's on me as much as on him. But yeah, so there are just these very strange tensions in the culture I grew up in, and I'm still trying to kind of piece those apart.
Cool. I think I kind of want to tackle that first one too, that first question, both from maybe childhood and currently. I was thinking about it. Pretty much through my teenagehood, my mom was working full time. And she didn't quite have to do that when I was a kid. And I remember her constantly lamenting basically that she wasn't able to be home on the floor doing puzzles like I did with the first half of the family type of thing. I'm the oldest. And so that was something that kind of was something that I've learned from that teenagehood, that was maybe not the preferred way, and yet it was the example that I saw. But it was just always, it was never like a positive thing for her. And yet, kind of like Kirsten, I also remember my parents expecting the very most of me. It was just expected that I would be going to college, expecting that I would be doing my best in school. And for some reason, this is going back way more in childhood, but I remember my dad specifically talking to me about just maybe to contrast what I had, but to say, like, you don't have to take a different last name if you don't want. You can keep your last name, and me just being boggled by that, like, how would that work? So I think there were kind of like these, maybe a couple mixed messages coming in. I feel like from my peers, it was very much the same, of doing the best I can, pushing myself as far as career and education. It was kind of never a question about whether I would be going to college or not. That was just always the goal. And it's kind of what all of my friends were doing. And so that's kind of where I've landed, but it's been interesting to land myself full-time, doing what I love, doing what I studied, and but among a bunch of other men, basically. So.
Okay, well, I agree with everything. Like, yes, that is my experience, like what you guys just talked about. But I'm gonna tackle the second question because it made me think. I was having a conversation with a friend this week, and she has a daughter who is in 8th grade, and at their school is offered a coding class. And my friend's husband is a coder, and her daughter was super excited to take this class, and so would put it as her first choice, on her little schedule thing. And for like 3 semesters, I think this might be the 4th. So she tried to get into the class last year, didn't. So anyway, couldn't get into this coding class. Finally got in after my friend had emailed the counselor and was like, she's interested in this. Can we just get her in this class? And so then it happened. And there's only 3 girls in that class of I don't know how many boys. And she, anyway, I just feel like it's interesting how like these same gender stereotypes are still, I mean, this was this week, but we just get pigeonholed in these directions, boys and girls. And anyway, that it made me think of, what was the question? How have you seen society treat boys and men differently? That would be a recent example.
Cool.
I feel like I still don't know which question I want to answer. They're so great. I think I'll go with the first one, sort of the roles that I've learned about gender from parents. So my mom and dad were very traditional in gender roles. My dad was the provider and my mom was the nurturer. I had an aunt and uncle. I had I have an aunt who sort of rides the line. I think she was very athletic. She worked on an assembly line at the Ford manufacturer, and, you know, sort of took on a lot of more traditionally masculine traits. And I just remember watching her, and she worked full time. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I just remember watching her and thinking, she can do anything, you know, and thinking, and now as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, is that what we teach our girls? Like, you can do this, this, and this, but men can do anything. And that breaks my heart a little. And I guess sort of the tension that exists there, right, is when I look at, have you ever read that book, Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus? And he has written out like traits of a woman, characteristics, traits of a man. If you look at that, I am a man. Like, I am more outspoken, more, you know, like I don't even know what those things are, but like even as a teenager or young adult, when I was looking at that, I was like, oh, I don't think I fit well in either box. And so so like when you're in the middle, and when your characteristics, it's just so tricky to see sort of what exists in these two boxes, and to know that when I just want to pick and choose what I want, is that so wrong? Like, like sometimes I want to work outside the home, and then sometimes I don't, right? So I think it just gets lost in translation with me.
I really resonate with everything everyone said. I love how we've kind of surfaced a couple like really relevant issues, the career and like work paths, what it means to be a traditional woman or man, and then this idea of unpaid labor and expectations outside of what you're contributing, and then just like how it reflects on your actual identity, like how I see myself, and like a little feeling of dissonance of like, am I supposed to feel more one way or the other way, and what messages. And then we all talked about like our families and what we absorbed without anyone telling us anything. So then thinking about what messages we're conveying with the choices we make and what we're doing, and how we interact with the world. So, you know, kind of thinking about that and keeping that all in mind, I'd like us to look at the next two questions, and then we'll spend the remainder of our time, or the bulk of the rest of our time, really kind of engaging with what we've heard from each other. So we'll go to another round of 2 minutes each. These two questions that you can choose between are, what does the feminist movement mean to you, and how has it affected you? Or, how have stories about women in history impacted you or someone you know? What role do historical monuments play in sharing our history? And I'm going to start in the middle with Kirsten this time. So we'll go Kirsten, Olivia, Julianne, Tanae, and then me, and then Amber.
And we can do either of the two questions?
Yeah, choose one of the two questions, yeah.
So the second question about women in history and historical monuments, I lived in Boston for several years, and in the middle of Boston, there's this big park that has several monuments and memorials. I think they're like 9 or 10. And the most recent one is the Boston Women's Memorial, and it has Abigail Adams and Phyllis Wheatley, and then I think Lucy Stone, like an abolitionist and a suffragist. And it's a beautiful monument. It's like very emotional for me to see it, but it also makes me so angry, because every woman who has ever come through Boston is represented by one memorial. And then there are like 9 other memorials to like, honestly, kind of random people. There's like the president of Argentina or something, and like a random like mayor from Boston, and like a fisherman. It makes me so angry to see like these women who should each have their own memorial are stuck with just one, sharing one, and that's meant to represent half of the population. And it's just such, like, to me, such an example, like a visceral visual example of the inequality and like the lack of space and time that are given to women and to women's stories. And I think it's so empowering to hear about women. And I think it's so important. It's not just a monument, it's not just a statue, it's not just taking up space in like a public park. It's showing women what their potential is and what they have the opportunity to be, and then again, just showing women that they should be taking up space, and there are things that they should be accomplishing and that they are accomplishing. And it also, like, as I'm a stay-at-home mom, and to me it also says, like, there's that implicit idea that, well, maybe women haven't been doing enough important or interesting things, and like just the idea that, like, what I do, my daily work, is not as valued and not as seen and as what men are doing when they go out into the workforce. Or, I mean, and there are other women as well who there are women who do things beyond being a stay-at-home mom, obviously. But so that's something that's like that's really important to me. And that has had an impact on the way I think about my own story and about those stories of other women that I've come in contact with and that I've learned about.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I had a bit of a knocker at the door earlier too. So stop me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go with the first question and move forward on that. I guess our third question, feminist movement.
You get to choose.
Sweet.
So
Okay.
for the third one.
So with this question, I'll read it aloud again. What does the feminist movement mean to you and how has it affected you? I find myself feeling like a bit of a paradox with this because while I feel like I was raised a little bit oblivious to what feminism was, like not really feeling conscious of it until probably well after I was married, I think. I also feel like it wasn't something that was maybe, I mean, it wasn't for good or for bad. So it was also not something that was like seen as anything negative for me, which is cool because I feel like I was able to find my own relationship with it. And yet I feel like I am a really good follower. So I feel like lots of those that I have come in contact with, maybe that feel strongly and are leading out feminism, active, how would you say, like, I guess the movements, I don't really resonate as much with feeling my whole life of seeing the different inequalities. And yet, as I've learned about them, then that's how I've become to feel more strongly about them. Like then it almost just becomes obvious. And then I just feel like, oh yeah, totally. Like, for example, just what Kirsten has said about like the work of a stay-at-home mother not being nearly as valued, like I'm right there with it, but I don't think I ever really noticed it until it was brought to my attention. So I feel like I kind of struggle with that because I want to call myself a feminist, and yet I don't see myself as a natural feminist, having come to these conclusions on my own. But what I do really resonate with is equality, and I feel like that's really all of what feminism is about. And so that's been really cool to learn more about and to strive for.
Okay, is it me? I couldn't remember. Okay. So I just going back with the historical monuments, I actually looked it up because I didn't know like how many we have of men and women. So in the United States, there's like 5,000 monuments and about 800 of those are of women, which was totally shocking to me and kind of disappointing. But it really does, I mean, having these visual markers, it really does, it's very telling what we value, I guess, as a society when we have like random fishermen, right? But we don't have like these important people, women in history represented visually for everyone to see. Anyway, that was just kind of eye-opening to me. So.
Has that had any personal impact on you? Like that messaging?
Yeah, like, because I feel like we're not as seen, you know, like we're not as valued.
Go ahead, Tanae. You're just
Oh.
soaking it all in.
I was like, yeah, we're not as seen.
Yeah.
We're not as valued. That is a fact. I wanted to talk about how the feminist movement affect me, what it means to me, and how it affects me. So I am, always have been, and always will be an avid fan of Claire Huxtable. I watched that show religiously as a child. Every Thursday night, we turned the television set so that we could watch it. And I mean, she was a boss, right? She is like so amazing. And I know I get like the conflict there. But so when I think of the feminist movement, I wrote a paper on Claire Huxtable's impact in college. And so I researched the feminist movements, and I think it's just so interesting to see how feminism has, in the culture that I've grown up in, a lot of women won't even touch the word, right? Because feminism is seen as a radical act. To stand up for equality for 50% of humans is considered a radical act, and it is astounding to me that that's the case. So when I think of the women who really took huge risks to be heard and to fight for the 800 of the 5,000 monuments that we have in our country, I am so grateful to them for that. And I think about where we would be without that. However, similarly, I am a woman of color. I have friends who are women of color, and I can't ignore the fact that, you know, when women fought for the right to vote, believing in equality, it gets tricky because at some point they negotiated Black women out of it. At some point it was more convenient to give up an idea of actual equality and full equality for everyone, and to just fight for it for sort of the preferred women. So even among a movement where equality is the goal, it's still conflicted, and it's just really, I mean, hairy, right? So I don't know. So it affects me in that you can still see the sort of the stratifying of even within our own gender, right? So
Yeah, we have a long way to go. I don't know if this qualifies as a monument, but when I saw the question, I thought of this experience I had with my daughter. And of course, it's always more poignant when it's happening to your child than when it's happening to you. But we were driving and we saw a billboard, and on it, it was like supposed to be some kind of like women's empowerment billboard, you know, one of those. And it's like, oh, look what she did. Oh, she did a thing, and she's a woman. Can you believe? And you know, it's the kind of thing that I have stopped. I don't know that I'm as keyed in to those moments, but my daughter is keyed in, and she's like, can't she just have done a wonderful thing and not have it be like, oh, she did a wonderful thing. Can you believe that a woman did such a cool thing? Like, we can't either. So that's why we're making a billboard about it. She's like, can't we just do remarkable things, and everybody can do remarkable things, you know? So when I thought about that, like, yeah, it's not a monument, but even in media representation, you know, even in like things like billboards. And it made me think about a moment when I was racing, because I used to compete really pretty intense level, maybe a little too much, but in a cycling race. And it was one of these things where I was putting everything on the line. It was a high stakes race, and one of those too where all the categories were racing together. So men and women were all on the same course, and we were all like, you know, racing together. So it happened late in the race. It's like a 200-mile race, that I was in a pack of men, and I was pulling the men. So you know how like geese fly, the same thing works in cycling. The person in the front is pulling and everyone else is benefiting from the draft. So I was pulling all these men for a while, and I pushed the pace so that we could drop some of the pack and, you know, kind of get an advantage with a stronger pack. Anyway, I finished my pull. I was falling back into the peloton, and one guy was like, "Oh my gosh, you're really strong for a girl." And before I could say anything, one of the other men was like, "Now hold on a second, I take issue with that. She's just strong." And I don't know that I would have said anything in my own defense, but I am grateful that, I mean, I'm hoping that with my daughter, you know, with people like this, you know, man, it was like, we can change the conversation. You're not strong, even though you're a girl, or you're not strong or smart or brave or whatever, even though you're a woman. Like, you're just strong and brave and smart and all the things, unqualified by your gender.
I love everything that you guys have said. I'm gonna go with what the feminist movement has meant to me. I remember like feminism being like whispered, or like something that had nothing to do with me or my value set, or it was just this like force that was in opposition to how I viewed myself as a woman, that I want to be a mother, that I want to stay home with my kids at some point, that I want to work at some point, and got a lot of like strong messages that reinforced that idea, I think. And then I remember, it really wasn't even that long ago, I had a friend post something on social media, someone that I loved and trusted, and really admired and respected, posted something that had like a really strong like feminist bent to it. And I was like, I was like, well, if she's posting that, like, she doesn't seem extremist to me. And then like digging into like, what was the like conversation behind this? Like, what are the reasons for it? And then all of a sudden, like this huge like light bulb moment of, oh, feminism just means we should have equal opportunity. And then I was like, like, how are we not all like really loud like proponents of feminism? Like, that's all we're asking. We're not saying you have to live your life one way or the other. It's just equal opportunity. And like to Tanae's point that she mentioned, to me that seems like such a simple thing. Like, yeah, let's just all get equal opportunity. And then I like watch how this idea has like trudged through the mud, like military crawling like forward, like trying to like gain some traction and get somewhere. And it's because like we get so distracted by like what that means, or like afraid of what it means, or what is it actually going to look like in like when we implement it, and like who is it taking opportunities away from, and like all of these things that I'm like, no, it should just be simple. Like, that just makes sense to me. And moving to Utah, like I discovered this huge, like really rich, like feminist history that I had no idea about. Like, I didn't realize we were the first women in the nation to vote. And like, speaking of monuments, there's this huge push where, you know, the two statues that go to the Capitol to represent the state, one of them was Brigham Young, which fair enough, first governor and all of the things. And then the other was Philo T. Farnsworth, who was the inventor of the television, who was actually from Idaho. So I don't know why he like lived in Utah at some point, and like, I don't even know how we claim him. And then there was this huge push to swap out that monument and statue and put Martha Hughes Cannon in, who was the first female state senator and beat her husband in the race, and was like a doctor and like ran a hospital, and like was just this like incredibly powerful figure and person. And I remember just being really excited and like swept up in this like history that we have. And like, and then at the same time, speaking of billboards, like all these billboards that we have that are like, freeze your fat off, and like like embrace the inner you and it's for plastic surgery. And I'm like, what is happening to us? Like, how have we gotten so confused? But anyway, that's I think that's a long explanation, but that's where I've kind of landed with feminism. It's just like, there's no reason for someone to not be a feminist. And we've got to reframe how we use that word, because everyone should be a feminist, like, period. So we can open it up and like react to some of the things that we heard. I just have one really funny billboard thing that I have to throw in there, and then I'll stop and let other people contribute. The way that we use women to sell things bums me out a lot. And I was in Italy and took a picture like at this train station, and there was a picture of a woman eating fresh mozzarella, like, and it's like the mozzarella milk is dripping down her chin. And I was like, I think it's a stretch to try to attach selling fresh mozzarella to a seductive woman, like when it's like coming, like where have we gotten to that we're like, oh yeah, like sexy women can sell anything, just anything. Like let's just throw them in there in the mix and people will buy it. But that was just a little bit of a tangent, but so what are you all thinking? Yeah, Tanae.
Sorry, to jump in really fast on the billboard situation. I once saw a billboard on our main highway here that said Women's Expo. And I thought, huh. And the next word, you guys, was chocolate. It was chocolate. Like, of all the things that women do, are interested in, talk about, they were advertising chocolate. And I was just, again, so disappointed in the expectations for women. Like, we do so many things. And I will also stop and let somebody else. We can change the subject now.
Amber, you got us in the billboard space.
I'll get us out of it.
Okay.
When Kirsten was talking, I made a note to myself. I mean, what Kirsten was saying about how like women are allowed to take up space, right? Even here, like we've all started apologizing. And I had a student I was just on a conference with earlier today, and she's like, well, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm sorry that I, have asked for a conference. I'm sorry that I need help and whatever. And I'm like, that's what I'm here for. It's my job. Like, you're not imposing on me. Like, I'm grateful you've reached out, but that it's sort of a women's problem to apologize for ourselves, or to like be ashamed if we ask too much, or we, we're too loud, or we're too big, or we're too like whatever. Yeah, we can't say things. We can't. I mean, even feminism, like, well, but you're allowed to advocate for yourself, but you're not allowed to do it loud, because then you're hysterical, and then you're crazy, and then you're wearing bras to protests, and we don't like that anymore. And women are allowed to take up space. And I wrote it down because I thought, like, Kirsten, that was just such an excellent point.
That is interesting to me, because I feel like I wonder where the line is with taking up the space that you deserve, and also dealing with the culture enough to try to make the changes in the way that they will be most accepted, so that you can make the most progress. Do we or is that just going to be counterintuitive to us to play the game and play into the role and apologize, or to do it quietly? I don't know. I'm curious if any of you feel one way or the other, of like, if you just try to find a balance, or if you lean more one way or the other. I don't know. I can't hear you.
You did. I figure someone knew we'd have figured it out by now. Like, I think that's like, like how much can we take up? Like, at what point do we become abrasive and like no one's gonna listen to us anymore, or shrill, or whatever lovely adjective we get.
Yeah, it's probably depending on the space and whatever, but
yeah, I mean, I feel like it doesn't take too much for women to be labeled abrasive or shrill or bossy or whatever the other words are. So I mean, yeah. I heard this quote recently. It said something like when you're used to privilege, equality will look like oppression. And I think that there's like some truth to that. Like there, so many men are so not all men, you know, but they're fantastic men. But there's a very loud subset of men who get so defensive and so angry when women try to assert themselves and try to put themselves up equally with men. And I think that's a big part of it. It's uncomfortable. And I think it's uncomfortable for women too, in a lot of ways, because I think so many women have played into the patriarchy in order to like get that power from it. They've, you know, contributed to it or built it up because that's for so long, that's been one of the only ways for women to access power in society.
Yeah, I have a special colleague who's a little older and loves to commandeer conversations. I'm on a committee with him, and there's a couple of students on that committee as well, and they're working on this big senior capstone project. And you know, there's some faculty and then the students. And I don't even think it's on his radar to know how badly he's steamrolling, particularly the students who are female. And so like some of it is just like, it's blind. You don't understand, what it feels like to be talked over. You don't understand what it feels like to be silenced, because you never have. That just hasn't been your system. You've gotten to have the last word. You've gotten to be the big person in the room. You've gotten to, like, you know, get where you want because of who you are. And you're not allowed to silence my student. And there's been a couple of times I'm like, she wasn't done, so we're gonna let her finish.
Yeah, like a Kamala Harris situation.
I just feel like, Amber, that's such a huge deal for that student, right? Like,
I hope so.
you're changing her whole, like, if somebody would do that for you or for me, like, that's a big deal. I think that's wonderful. I mean, that you are willing to put yourself out there. I think it's horrible. And that man, I wish there was a way to show that and demonstrate it. And one thing I wanted to talk about, I'll switch gears really quickly, is I know in the earlier questions, two of you talked about sort of the home, like trying to be a domestic goddess while also, you know, being really educated and professionally capable and performing well there too. And it made me think about my husband is also interested in feminism and equality, right? It benefits all of us, and he sees that. But I remember a few years ago having a conversation where I just said, and it was really hard for me to say, but just telling him that, like, I couldn't do, like, I felt really slighted that I got to be a mom while he got to be a dad and a successful business person. And that was like, I was so scared to have this conversation, because every woman's dream is to be a mom, right? That should be enough. Or that's the messaging that I got. I should be happy enough to be a mom because that's what I was put on this earth for. And I just remember his response was so perfect and like, really, what do you mean? And so it has changed, and like he didn't recognize it, which is exactly what Amber was just talking about, the lack of recognition. Like, we have to be willing to step out of these comfort zones and like have tough conversations. And it could have gone a different way. My husband could have been offended completely. I don't know. That's all.
Well, and I think it's okay to say, like, I have a full-time job too. Maybe some of these household duties, maybe you can take some of them. You know, this is something I've had to learn. I mean, because definitely I was like a martyr to my motherhood and felt like I had to do everything and had to do it all and whatever. But guess what? Like, I have a full-time job too. So tell me in what part of your day you're able to do, you know, X, Y, Z and, you know, ABC around the house while keeping on top of your full-time job. Like, why is that expected of me?
I think that the idea that like this unpaid labor is expected and not like valued by society is also kind of one of the books that we read for our social justice book club was Invisible Women. And I remember like calling Kirsten being like, I'm so angry, like I can't even think right now. Like if I look at my cell phone, I'm going to be triggered because all the testing was done just for male hands and not female hands, and I can't reach the buttons and like all the things like that. I was just like, how are we not taken into account? Like how you know, like the seatbelt testing is done for the average male body. Like there are no studies on safety for seatbelts for female bodies. And I'm like, how is this possible? How do we not factor in to not only like taking up space, but being considered like in so many places. I'm getting a little like amped.
A quick follow-up maybe to that and some of what Amber was saying just had me thinking like, and what can I do as Olivia in my space to like make changes and make the best changes, I guess. Like I was thinking like, oh yeah, like me and my husband have figured out really good ways to kind of split the roles. I think he picks up a ton of the household stuff, and that could be great. But right now it's my kids that are seeing that, and that's probably good. How much should I vocalize about how cool that is to everybody else so that other people know? Like I wonder if there's any way to like get the link from the things that we're figuring out in my own little under my roof to the seatbelt testers and the phone testers, you know, like I wonder what the ways are to bridge to make those.
I think the ways we do that is just to have more women in leadership, right? Like in positions where we have a voice, you know, because there probably weren't any women in the seatbelt testing meeting, you know, like I think we just need to put ourselves out there and just, make sure that we are in that conversation, whether it's just in our own little family or maybe, you know, in like a church group or, you know what I mean? Like something like that, like our voice is valid.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kirsten.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think that's so crucial. And I think the kind of the other side of that coin is that care work, nurture work, unpaid work needs to be valued, because there are always going to be children. There are always going to be houses that needs to be cleaned and meals that need to be cooked. And if all these women are out in leadership positions, which 100% needs to happen, who's going to be doing the rest of that? It's going to go to other women who are just going to be like more, you know, like women in, like we saw this during the pandemic, all these women who are running daycare centers, there's no one to take care of their kids. They're underpaid, they're overworked. And until we start to value that labor the same way that we value, I don't know, like people like randomly like buying stocks and stuff on Wall Street, it's not going to fix the problem for women, because women are still going to do that work and they're just going to become more and more marginalized.
So I think that this is a really nice kind of segue into the next question. I feel like we're moving to like next steps. What do we do? Like, what are our hopes for the future? And so I'd love to do like one more go around where we're considering like, what are your hopes moving forward? Either like what would an equitable society look like that takes into account gender, or you know, like what do you plan on doing in your life moving forward? And for me, what stood out when Olivia was talking about like, you know, what can I do? I think that we are driven by stories. And so in the places where I'm invited to speak or contribute, I always try to like highlight and elevate stories of women. And I think that, you know, there are some great organizations that do this. We all live in Utah, and there's this organization called Better Days 2020, where they went through the archives and pulled out these stories of these strong female leaders and people that have had impact like on our state. And I think that it's that work of like digging out the stories and normalizing talking about women as much as we talk about men. And then I think that like when we're in the narrative of society, or like in people's minds, and become like heroes and role models, not because we're women, but because we've done great things, then that helps us move into those leadership spaces and all of those other things. So that's something that I'm going to think about, like how I can do that, and normalize it for my kids and whoever else I have any sort of influence on. So we'll go reverse order on my screen. So we'll go Tanae, Julianne, Olivia, Kirsten, and Amber.
I asked myself so often what an ideal society would look and feel like in the realm of sex and gender relations, because I think I can't really figure it out, right? I think that people should be able to take whatever careers they're interested in and have partnerships where, you know, each partner feels supported in fulfilling their hopes and dreams. And I think it looks like sort of what Olivia said, a lot of modeling that behavior, and us being, those of us who benefit from those partnerships, being open to sharing that that information that we've sort of what's like worked for us. And so I feel like that's something I can talk about more, but also just like Julianne was just mentioning, right? Like we have to be willing to step into leadership roles and take more on our plates over and over again.
So in education, I feel like we talk a lot about equity versus equality. And I think, you know, sometimes when you're talking about feminism or whatever it is, we always think, okay, well, we need like equality, right? But really, like we don't need equality, we need equity. And I think especially with women, like we do have differences and we need different supports. It makes me think of like how New Zealand just passed something where you get whatever time off, right? If you have a miscarriage, which I feel like is a huge deal. And that contributes to like this equity, right? Like women, we need different things. And if we're going to be successful, we need to have those supports in place so that we feel supported, right? Or like that single mom can have a place for her kids. Like, I guess there's just things that men don't have to think about and we do. So like, yeah, just thinking about equity, I guess.
I think in tackling maybe the first part of this question, as opposed to like my hopes, as opposed to the ideal, I think this has given me good ideas. So thank you to all of you. That I think I want to just be more deliberate about the way that I'm thinking about things, the way that I'm learning and educating myself, so that in turn I can be more intentional and deliberate with the way that we're living again under our roof, and maybe how I can tell our own story and learn more about others' stories, so that those can just be perpetuated to hopefully change the tide and just get more women more opportunities.
I think it's my turn. So hopes moving forward, I guess, on like a very like personal, granular level, like I have 4 sons. I would love for one of them to be a stay-at-home dad someday, and for like that to not be a weird thing. An ideal society, I would love for these conversations for like, you know, my children or my grandchildren. I would love for these conversations to just sound so bizarre to them that like we ever had to have, we ever had to talk about this. I would just love for equality or equity. I would just love for that to be the norm, not to be, and kind of going back to what Amber was talking about with the billboards, like not to like have it be so strange when a woman does something great. Just to celebrate those stories and to share those stories just like we would a story of a man, and not this is only important because it's a woman. This is only outstanding because it's a woman. And I think that I love what you guys have talked about with the stories. And I think that's such an important way to push that forward and to see that happen.
Mine's a little different, but I just finished listening to Stay Sexy and Don't Get Murdered. I just listened to it on Audible. And there's this whole like culture of like victim shaming and, you know, the whole whatever, because the authors of that book like wrote all of their things on, you know, serial killers and whatever. That's their wheelhouse. But for me personally, like every time I go for a bike ride by myself, I am scared for my safety. And there are places I will not run alone because I'm scared for my safety. And I have to go places that are well lit, that are in the middle of the day, that are up with a lot of houses. In my perfect world, where there are no like victims of gender, I want my children, my daughters, my stepdaughters to be able to go wherever they want and feel safe. I hate that even when I go to the rec center by myself, the weird old man accidentally like stroked me with his hand when we were swimming. Like, what the hell, right? I hate that there are places I can't go at certain times of the day, places I can't go alone. So for me, like equity, equality, whatever, it looks like just physical safety. I had a night class where, you know, my class ended at 9 o'clock at night and I'm walking out into the parking lot alone. Like I guarantee my male students didn't feel the same trepidation walking to their car that I did. An equitable society to me means a society where women aren't afraid.
Amber, thanks everyone else for sharing too. I feel like we didn't even get to like the personal safety piece, which I could talk for hours about. And I'm sure we all have experiences where we've felt that trepidation, that unease, and like we're at risk. And I think I'm glad that you brought that out since it didn't surface earlier in our conversation. I am super grateful that you were able to bring your thoughts, your amazing, powerful feminine energy to this conversation. And as always, it's such a pleasure talking to all of you. I would highly encourage you and anyone else who sees this video in the future to have these conversations. Have them in your book club, with your besties, with male allies that you trust. You know, really dig into this and use these questions in any way to get those stories started, to start, you know, taking up space and allowing women and their stories and their experiences to take up space so that, you know, we have that idyllic future where people will look back and be like, they were so backwards. Like, how is this ever an issue? And everyone feels safe, and all the things that you guys said and hoped for. I share those same hopes. So thank you for being here and for tuning in. And let's talk about women.
Thank you.
Becca,
Thanks,
everyone.
guys.